judge versus childhood best friend. How one mistake led to a shocking verdict and revealed the dark secrets of the past. In a small town in the south of the country where everyone knew each other, a story happened that shocked the local community. Judge Richard Gray, a respected member of society, and his childhood best friend, Mike Davis, found themselves on opposite sides of the barricades in a trial that changed their lives forever. Chapter 1. Friends for Life. Richard and Mike grew up together. They shared school desks, played soccer on the street, and dreamed of the future. Richard was always a more serious, single-minded guy who knew he wanted to be a judge. His parents were strict, and since childhood, he understood the importance of discipline and responsibility. Mike, on the other hand, was more frivolous, loved adventures, and was not afraid to take risks. He often forced Richard out of his comfort zone, which sometimes led to funny situations. One day, when they were 12 years old, they decided to go to an abandoned construction site. Richard was hesitant at first, but Mike persuaded him, "Come on, it's going to be fun. We can find the treasures." In the end, they found only old bricks and a lot of dust. But this day became one of those that they would remember for the rest of their lives. They laughed until they cried and felt like real adventurers. Gradually, their paths began to diverge. Richard went to law school and became a successful judge, while Mike could not find himself in life. He tried different professions, from a store clerk to a mechanic, but he didn't stay anywhere for long. Despite this, their friendship remained strong. They met often, recalled their childhood, and supported each other in difficult times. Chapter 2. An Unforeseen Event. One evening, when Richard was returning home from work, he noticed that his phone was vibrating. It was a call from Mike. He sounded worried and even scared. "Richard, I need your help," he said with a tremor in his voice. It soon became clear that Mike had witnessed a terrible incident. He saw his neighbor kill a man in a parked car. "I didn't know what to do. I was shocked," Mike continued. Richard knew immediately that this was serious. He advised his friend to contact the police, but the latter hesitated. "If I tell them I saw it, I might get dragged into the case," replied Mike. Richard tried to calm him down. "You have to report this. It is important. A man's life is on the line." But Mike couldn't get his thoughts together. He was paralyzed by fear and did not know how to act. Chapter 3. Error. Despite Mike's hesitation, he eventually agreed to report the incident. However, due to his indecision and fear, he did not provide the police with all the necessary details. He did not mention that he had seen the killer and did not even give an accurate description of the car. It turned out to be a fatal mistake. The case was developing rapidly. The police arrested a suspect, a man with a dark past who already had problems with the law. But due to lack of evidence, the case was closed. Meanwhile, Mike was tormented by guilt for not doing more. He couldn't sleep at night. He was plagued by nightmares about what he saw. What if I could have prevented it? He thought over and over again. Every time he met Richard, he felt ashamed of his indecision. Chapter 4. The Trial. A few months have passed, and the case has resurfaced. The murder became a topic of discussion in the city, and local media actively covered it. Suddenly, Richard found himself in the middle of a trial as a judge. He was supposed to be investigating the very murder his best friend had witnessed. Sitting on the bench, Richard felt trapped. He knew the whole truth about Mike and his questionable testimony. How could he pass a fair sentence on his friend? Every time he looked at Mike in the courtroom, his heart would burst with pain. Mike was sitting in the witness box, his face pale. His hands were shaking and his gaze was full of fear and despair. He understood that his testimony could change the fate of a person, both the accused and himself. Chapter 5. Discovering Dark Secrets. New facts began to surface during the trial. The investigation revealed dark secrets about the victim and the suspect. It turned out that the victim was involved in criminal activities and the suspect had ties to the local mafia. Mike began to realize that his testimony could have serious consequences not only for him but also for many other people. He began to realize that his mistake could lead to the fact that an innocent person would end up behind bars. Richard realized that the situation was getting more confusing. He started collecting information about the victim and the suspect. Each new fact opened up new horizons for him and called into question everything previously known. Chapter 6. Conflict of Interest. Richard was faced with a choice. As a judge, he must follow the law and ensure justice. But as a friend, he felt the need to protect Mike. This situation has become a real moral test for him. He began to realize the complexity of his role. There was a tense atmosphere in the courtroom. Richard knew that every step he took would be scrutinized and any decision he made could be appealed. He began to collect evidence in order to find out the truth and find a fair solution. Mike also understood the gravity of the situation and decided to tell all the details of that evening. He met with Richard outside the court and tried to explain his actions. "I was only thinking about myself. I was afraid for my life. But now I realize that I should have done more." Chapter 7. The Search for Truth. Richard decided to conduct his own investigation. He began interviewing witnesses and gathering information about the victim and the suspect. Each new fact opened up new horizons for him and called into question everything previously known. He learned that the victim had many enemies and was involved in the dark affairs of the local mafia. This discovery was a turning point for Richard. Now he realized that the matter was much more complicated than it seemed at first glance. Richard also decided to meet with defense and prosecution lawyers to discuss the new facts of the case. He understood that he had to be honest with himself and with the law. Chapter 8. The Time of Truth. When it came time to pronounce the verdict, Richard felt more nervous than ever. He knew he had to be honest with himself and the law. The words sounded heavy. "Based on the evidence presented and the witness statements, I find the accused not guilty." There was a shocked whisper in the courtroom. Mike looked at Richard with gratitude and fear at the same time. He understood that this truth could change their lives forever. After the verdict was announced, Richard felt relieved that he had done what he thought was right. But at the same time, the realization came that their friendship would now be tested for strength. Chapter 9. Consequences. After the verdict was announced, the lives of both men changed forever. Richard lost some of his reputation as a judge. Some considered his decision biased because of his friendship with Mike. However, he knew that he had done the right thing. Mike also faced the consequences of his actions. His fears that he could become the next target of revenge from the mafia became a reality. Although he was found innocent by a witness to the murder, his life will never be the same again. Shortly after the trial, Mike began receiving threats from people with the victim's dark past. He knew that he had to be careful, know his life was in danger. Chapter 10. A New Life. Over time, Richard and Mike tried to rebuild their friendship. They realized that their bond had been tested by fire and was now much stronger. They both learned an important lesson about honesty and responsibility. Richard continued his career as a judge, but now he became more careful in his decisions and always remembered that case as a warning about how easily you can lose everything because of one mistake. Mike, on the other hand, decided to change his life. He began volunteering at an organization to help people in difficult situations because of past mistakes. He knew that he had to use his experience to help others avoid making the same mistakes. Chapter 11. The Test of Friendship. Despite all efforts to restore friendship after the trial, tensions arose between Richard and Mike. Each of them experienced the events of recent months in their own way. Richard felt guilty for not being able to protect his friend from the consequences of his mistakes. Mike felt a sense of betrayal for having to testify against his neighbor. One evening, they met at a local bar, the place of their youth meetings, to discuss the situation face to face. The atmosphere was tense. Both men knew that the conversation could lead to conflict. "I just want to understand," Richard began, concern evident in his voice. "Why didn't you tell me everything right away? Why didn't you tell the police all the details?" "I was afraid," Mike replied sincerely. "I didn't want to get involved in this case. I was only thinking about myself." "But it cost a man his life," Richard cried out. I know," Mike shouted back. "But you don't understand. I was in a panic. I didn't know." The conversation continued for a long time. They tried to understand each other through anger and pain. Eventually, both men realized that their friendship needed healing. Chapter 12: The Path to Forgiveness. Richard decided to help his friend cope with the consequences of what had happened. He suggested that Mike take a course of therapy in order to learn how to cope with his fears and experiences. Mike agreed to this offer. He needed to sort out his feelings and learn to move on after everything that had happened. They started taking psychology classes together. Sometimes it was hard. Remembering those events again was not easy. But gradually they began to understand each other better. Therapy helped them to open up their feelings and fears to each other. They began to talk about their experiences without fear of judgment. Chapter 13: New Horizons. Over time, their friendship began to recover. They began to spend more time together, traveling around the city or just walking in the park. Mike also began to work on himself. He enrolled in self-development courses and took up sports. This helped him get rid of stress and learn to control his emotions. Richard continued his career as a judge. He became more attentive to details and tried to avoid bias in his decisions. Chapter 14: Unexpected Obstacles. Despite all efforts to restore friendship after the trial, tensions between Richard and Mike arose again, especially when new threats from the mafia appeared. One night, strangers came to them. They threatened Mike for witnessing the murder of their friend. The murdered man turned out to be an important figure in the underworld of the city. "You have to shut up," they shouted through the window of Mike's house, "or you'll regret it." Mike was in a panic. He understood that now his life was in danger again because of his previous decisions. Chapter 15: Solving the Problem. Richard understood the gravity of the situation. He knew that he had to protect his friend at all costs. Together, they decided to seek help from the police. It was risky, but they had no other choice. They told the police about all the threats they had received. Law enforcement agencies launched an investigation to protect Mike from possible revenge from the mafia. Meanwhile, Richard continued to work on his case. He realized that now he needed to be especially careful to avoid possible conflicts of interest. Chapter 16: A New Turn of Events. Despite all the efforts of the police, the threat remained urgent. One night, when Mike was returning home, he noticed a black car following him from afar. "It's them," he thought to himself. His heart started pounding with fear when he saw the car approaching him. The situation became critical. Mike called Richard to call the police, but the connection was cut off. Someone disconnected the phone. In a panic, he rushed to run to the nearest store to hide inside. There, he found shelter, but realized that this was only a temporary solution to the problem. Chapter 17: The Battle for Survival. Meanwhile, Richard realized what was going on. He quickly packed up and went in search of Mike, knowing that he might be in danger. When Richard got to the store, he saw a black car stop nearby. Two men got out of it, heading towards the store entrance. Richard shouted, rushing forward to stop them. He needed to protect his friend at all costs. There was a struggle. Richard grabbed one of the attackers by the shoulder, trying to throw him back when the second man tried to punch him in the face. They fought for several minutes until the police arrived. The men ran away, but it was too late. They were detained right at the crime scene. Chapter 18: The End of the Threat. After this incident, the threat to Mike was eliminated. the police conducted an investigation into all the facts of the mafia case that had threatened him earlier. Richard was rewarded for his courage, and Mike was finally able to breathe freely. Now they both knew that they could count on each other in difficult times. Their friendship has become stronger than ever before. They have realized how important it is to support each other, even when life puts them through serious challenges. Chapter 19. New Challenges. However, the calm did not last long. Soon after the threat was eliminated, new problems began. Old acquaintances from Mike's past appeared on the horizon who wanted to bring him back to the world of crime. One evening, when he and Richard were having dinner at a restaurant, a stranger with a sullen face approached them. "Mike Davis, have you forgotten where you came from? We're looking for you." Mike felt a chill down his spine. He knew that these people were a danger to him and Richard. "I left there," he replied confidently, but panic was raging inside him. "You can't just leave," the stranger said with a grin. "We need you." Richard felt the tension in the air. He knew that the situation could spiral out of control at any moment. "Get your hands off, my friend," he said firmly, looking straight into the stranger's eyes. Chapter 20. Protecting a Friend. The stranger looked at Richard with disdain, but then retreated to the door of the restaurant. "You're going to regret this." With that, he walked out, leaving the two men in a state of confusion. "What should we do?" Mike asked in a trembling voice. He understood that this was only the beginning of the problem. "We have to go to the police," Richard replied decisively. They knew that without the support of law enforcement agencies, they would not be able to cope with this threat. They immediately went to the police station where they reported all the incidents that had occurred recently. The officers promised to take security measures to protect Mike from possible attacks from old acquaintances. Chapter 21. Rethinking Life. While the police were investigating, Mike decided to change his life dramatically. He realized that he could not continue to live under constant threat from his former friends from the criminal world. He started taking self-defense classes to learn how to defend himself. He also enrolled in entrepreneurship courses to open his own business away from crime. Richard supported his friend in all his endeavors. Together, they searched for new opportunities for the future without fear of the past that had haunted them for a long time. Chapter 22. New Beginnings. Mike opened a small sports nutrition store, which quickly gained popularity among local residents. His efforts paid off, and the business began to bring stable income. Richard was proud of his friend for being able to overcome his fears and start a new life away from crime. Their friendship only grew stronger with every day they spent together. However, Mike's old acquaintances were not going to leave him alone so easily. One evening, when the store was closing, the very people who had threatened him earlier approached him. "Do you think we're just going to let you go?" one of them asked with a sullen face. "We'll be back." Chapter 23. Preparing for Battle. Mike knew that now he needed to be prepared for anything. He began to study self-defense more seriously, attending classes every day to become stronger physically and mentally. Richard also decided to help his friend prepare for a possible encounter with criminals. Together, they developed an action plan in case the threats become reality again. They spent a lot of time together discussing strategies to protect the store, as well as ways to avoid confrontations with Mike's former acquaintances. Chapter 24. The Clash. Soon the day came when the tension reached its peak. One evening, as the store was preparing to close, those same strangers appeared at the door again, demanding to bring their old friend back to the world of crime. "We know where you work," one of them said, looking menacingly at Mike. "You can't hide from us." Mike felt the adrenaline rush through his body. He knew it was now or never time to show these people who was in charge. "Get out of here," he said confidently, looking straight into the eyes of his enemies. "I'm not yours anymore." Chapter 25. Business Protection. The conflict broke out instantly. Strangers rushed forward trying to attack Mike, but he was ready for this moment. Richard rushed forward to protect his friend, but suddenly one of the attackers grabbed his shoulder, trying to knock him down. There was a struggle that lasted for several minutes until the police arrived at the scene thanks to the alarm system installed in the store. The detainees were arrested and the police launched an investigation into all the facts of the attack on the sports nutrition store. Chapter 26. A New Start. After this incident, Mike's life began to change for the better. Thanks to the support of the police, he managed to get restraining measures against his harassers as well as protection for his business. He continued to grow his company, attracting new customers with high-quality products and excellent service. Richard continued his career as a judge, remaining true to the principles of justice despite all the trials that befell both friends. Chapter 27. Reconciliation. Over time, both men realized how important their friendship was, despite all the difficulties they had to overcome together. They have become real partners, supporting each other both in business and personal life. Mike also decided to start a new hobby by playing sports to keep fit, and Richard joined him, sharing the joy of working out together. Chapter 28. Life Lessons. The story of Richard and Mike became known in their city as an example of how one mistake can lead to unexpected consequences. They both learned important lessons about honesty and responsibility for their actions, as well as how important it is to have the support of loved ones nearby. Now they looked to the future with hope. They had new goals and dreams that inspired them to move forward despite all the difficulties they had to overcome together. Their friendship has become a symbol of fortitude, overcoming difficulties, and faith in a better future no matter what.